Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Comic Sans podcast. I'm your host, Dylan Jumps, and today we're going to talk about the new X-Men series that just started within the past month or so. Now, to get into where we're at right now, I just want to bring you up to speed with not only the traditional origins of the X-Men, but also what's been happening over these last 2 years in the world of X-Men, ultimately getting into issue number 1 of this new series. So I got my notes here because if not, I could get stuck on tangents about the X-Men and what's been going on all day. So I'll keep this pretty short and sweet. As far as the X-Men, for people who are unfamiliar, they are a team of mutants, such as, Wolverine, Storm, Cyclops, Jean Grey, among others that you may be familiar with. What makes mutants different from your average superhero is that they're actually born with an X gene that manifests as a power once they go through puberty. There's countless mutants and just as many different powers. Traditionally, the X-Men's base of operations has been the Charles Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters, which is pretty much a boarding school for mutants. That's secret, though. They masquerade as a boarding school, but they do teach the children how to control their abilities so that they're not a harm to themselves or others. Their goal in the past has been, to coexist with humanity peacefully, which hasn't always worked out for them. A lot of the time, if they're not at the Xavier Institute, then they're on the run from, humans that do hate and fear them. As you can imagine, that could definitely, weigh on someone, and the X-Men do get pretty much tired. They give up on coexisting, and that brings us up to the events of the last 2 years. They've actually started their own island nation called Krakoa, and that's why the title of this video is the Krakoan X-Men. Krakoa is a living island. The greenery is all alive and part of a sentient being, which is Krakoa. Among other things, Krakoa is able to produce medicines that can actually cure all diseases, can make people, pretty much at the peak of their game if they take these medicines. In addition to that, Krakoa produces these seeds where, if planted anywhere in the world, they can create a portal that only mutants can cross through and get right back to Krakoa. So Krakoa is always on the move, never, sitting in one spot. And it's really, for any mutant throughout the world, it's just a step away if they go through through these gates. Over the past 2 years, what we've seen is, and there's a lot of stuff that goes into this, a lot of different story arcs and really interesting stuff. But to keep it simple, over the past 2 years, they've just been solidifying their place in the world, in society. Part of that goes into the medicines that Krakoa produces. What they tell the rest of the world is that we'll give you these medicines for free as long as you acknowledge our sovereignty. And most nations do, and there are definitely some great story arcs going into how they, secretly get these medicines to the people of the nations that don't accept them. But that's a story for another time. They're over the past 2 years, they've been protecting Krakoa from threats that want to, take out the mutants. And they've even terraformed Mars with the help of, two notable mutants that helped were Magneto, who can control metal with his mind. He flew iron through space to Mars, plunged it into the core. Another mutant named Vulcan heats up that core. And then Storm who's able to control the weather, actually creates an atmosphere for the planet, and they renamed the planet Araco, which is it alludes to the name of another island, somewhat like Krakoa, but again, story for another time. There's a lot of different tangents that I could go on. Um, and throughout these last 2 years, the X-Men series that's been written by Jonathan Hickman, who's pretty much head up the whole X-Men department. There's different stories written by different people, but they all have kind of been working under his blueprint. And his flagship series, though, of the X-Men, we never actually see an official team of X-Men. It's more kind of just the glue that holds everything together, and we see them trying to attain their goals of becoming, a world power. And so after they've done that for a while, and it's kind of time to get back to the basics a little bit, Cyclops decides that a new team of X-Men needs to be formed to protect not just Krakoa, but the world like they used to, not just the interests of this new nation. And that's really all you need to know for us to get into X-Men #1. They did restart the series once they actually unveiled a new team of X-Men. That team includes Cyclops, who, if you're unfamiliar, he can shoot optic blasts from his eyes. Jean Grey, who is a telekinetic and telepath. Then there's also Wolverine, but not the Wolverine you're used to, and we'll get into that once I start going over issue #1. Sync is a mutant that you may not be familiar with, and he can copy the abilities of other mutants. Also, there's Polaris, who can control metal with her mind, and if you hadn't guessed, she is the daughter of Magneto. And also we've got Sunfire, who pretty self-explanatory. He has fire abilities. He's somewhat like the mutant version of the Human Torch, which is part of the Fantastic Four. And so, jumping into issue 1 of the X-Men, we're first introduced in just an opening scene to a scientist, pretty much child prodigy, Kelvin Hang, and we learn that his life's work has been to go to Mars and make it livable for humans. And if you'll remember, I just mentioned how the X-Men superseded any other plans and just went to Mars and took it for their own. So that's kind of just the beginning scene. We see that he's starting to build resentment towards the mutants, which has been a common theme in the mutant stories in the past. Kelvin Hang, by the way, as far as I know, is just a human at this point. We haven't been led to believe anything else. Next scene, we open with it's called the Treehouse. It's the X-Men's new base of operations. They bought land in New York and pretty much planted this seed that grew into a giant treehouse. I mean, the name of their base is pretty self-explanatory. It's a treehouse. And we see Cyclops talking to a reporter. His name's Ben Urich. He's been in other series. He's kind of the token journalist in Marvel. Ben Urich is interviewing Cyclops because this treehouse just popped up overnight, and we see, they're just pretty friendly with each other. But then Ben starts to ask some uncomfortable questions about a mutant named Jumbo, who had previously been pronounced dead, but is now walking around with the other mutants. Now, something that I did skip over purposely is that in these last 2 years, the mutants have unlocked the key to pretty much immortality by using 5 mutants' powers in tandem. They were able to figure out how to make clones of mutants whenever a mutant dies. They don't keep clones around because you never know what could happen with that. But when a mutant dies, Professor Xavier, who is traditionally, he's been the bald man in the wheelchair. He's a telepath, but in this series, he's been put into a cloned body where he's now, walking upright, and with the help of his portable Cerebro. If you might remember from the X-Men movies from the early 2000s, Cerebro is that big room that he goes into and sees all the mutants. Now he's got a helmet that is just Cerebro, and he uploads all the mutants' consciousness into Cerebro, and that's just a periodic thing. So if a mutant dies, the 5, they create a new body, and then Professor Xavier downloads that saved consciousness into that body. And so really, they're not really fearful of death anymore, but there are different I mean, they obviously don't want to die because things can go wrong. And so as the reader, we know about this, but society at large, they have no clue that the X-Men are doing this or that they can do this. So once Ben Urich starts to ask questions about Jumbo and how he's now alive, Cyclops kind of sidesteps the question and just goes on up to the treehouse. That's where we see, Jean Grey's waiting for him up there. She telepathically overheard the conversation, and they briefly talk about it. We see Sync working on some technology. He's mimicking the powers of a mutant called Forge, who's not an official member of the team, but his power is to pretty much invent anything that he can think of. Not too long after, we see Polaris come into the treehouse. And then, there's just a brief conversation. This is all kind of, exposition at this point. But not too far into the issue, we see what looks like a meteor hurtling at the city, and Rogue is flying through. She's also, I missed her. Rogue is also a member of the new X-Men team. If you'll remember from the previous movies, she was the one where if she touches you, she can absorb your power, but it also is bad for you. And in the comics, she actually absorbed so much of Captain Marvel's abilities that she permanently now has flight and super strength. Among the same ability of being able to absorb others. So she's flying after this comet, and then we see this giant kind of biological but also looks kind of technological beast, and they start fighting. That's when we see the X-Men join her, and if you'll notice, the Wolverine on the team is a female. Now, this version of Wolverine is actually the grown-up version of the little girl from the Logan movie that was like a little Wolverine. And so she's part of the team. And they join up their powers to build what they call the X-Mech. It's really, really cool. All of their powers in tandem make them able to, Polaris grabs metal from the nearby construction sites. Cyclops kind of stands in this lens area where he can shoot his optic beam and it becomes huge. It's really cool. And so the X-Mech goes up against this giant beast, and ultimately what they do is they create a crack in its armor, and Wolverine launches over to the beast, gets in that hole, and just starts slicing it up until it collapses to the ground. For a moment, we see that the Fantastic Four and the Avengers were on their way, but once they get there, the threat has already been taken care of. They thank the X-Men and, get on with their days to, fight whatever other crime is happening in the universe. Ultimately, they decide to hold on to the X-Mech and tinker with it just in case they may need it in the future. And that's the end of their, the crime fighting day for the X-Men. In the next scene, we're brought to Game World, which is pretty much Las Vegas, but in space. And we learn that the fight that was just had was actually being bet on by aliens. There's a game that no one on Earth is aware of, but it's their people at this game world are sending creatures to Earth to try and take out the human race, but not destroy the planet because they think of Earth as prime real estate. We're introduced to Cordyceps Jones, which is a weird creature that looks to be inhabiting a dead astronaut, because we see an astronaut suit with a skeleton inside of it, but then all of a sudden this maybe plant-like being starts to slither out of it and toasts the other alien villains that you can see in the room. After that, we're shown what looks like some type of egg, maybe, and shortly after, a human-like being but with spider legs falls out of that egg and is subjected to a radiation blast. Ultimately, we find out that this is someone, probably that Kelvin Hang guy from the beginning, experimenting on humans in order to compete with mutants and their abilities. At the end, the final question we see is, how are the X-Men resurrecting their dead? So that's a tie back into Cyclops's and Urich's conversation earlier, and it seems like it's going to be a big deal to everyone. They're going to be wanting to try and figure out how the X-Men have been doing this. That is issue number 1 of the X-Men. I forgot, I do have issue number 1 right here. It is not the original cover. It's what you would call a variant cover. And before I know people get uncomfortable hearing the word variant nowadays. It has nothing to do with getting sick. It's just a version of the cover that is not the original cover drawn for this issue. This specific variant is actually a trading card variant of Cyclops. And I like the trading card variants. They look pretty cool, and I really like Cyclops. So that's it for issue number 1. Tried to, make it as detailed without going on and on. Let me know what you thought about the issue, and I'm excited to get into issue number 2 and share my thoughts on that with you guys. I think that we are looking forward to some big battles from multiple different from multiple sides. We've got the aliens that are trying to take out the beings on Earth, and then we've also got that new Kelvin Hang character, and we'll see what he cooks up to get back at the X-Men for ruining his lifelong dream of I guess just settling on Mars. Again, go ahead, like, share, comment, all that stuff. This has been another episode of the Comic Sam podcast. Your host, Dylan Jumps. Enjoy the rest of your day.